Muammar Gaddafi spent his final minutes hiding in a drainage pipe beneath a highway. Saddam Hussein was found in a hole in the ground with $750,000 in cash and no plan left. Pol Pot, the man responsible for nearly 2 million deaths, died on a cot in the jungle and was cremated on a pile of old tires and garbage. All of them had held absolute power. All of them believed it would last. These are the final days of history's most powerful dictators, and what's striking isn't just how badly it ended. It's how long each of them refused to believe it was ending at all. Idi Amin ruled Uganda with absolute brutality for 8 years, and then, in 1979, it ended almost overnight. Tanzanian forces and Ugandan exiles pushed into the country from the south, and the military that had kept him in power collapsed within weeks. He fled to Libya, then Iraq, and eventually settled in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where the government provided him with a comfortable apartment, a monthly allowance, and one condition: stay out of politics entirely. He accepted. He lived there for more than 2 decades, reportedly still believing he would eventually return to Uganda and reclaim power. He gave occasional interviews, denied the massacres, and told journalists he missed his country. By 2003, his kidneys were failing. He slipped into a coma and died on August 16th at the age of 78. Saudi authorities notified Uganda. Uganda declined to bring the body home. He was buried in Jeddah with no state ceremony and no acknowledgement from the government he once ran. The families of the estimated 300,000 people killed under his rule were not consulted. But if Amin's ending was a slow, quiet erasure, the next one was the opposite. Muammar Gaddafi had ruled Libya for 42 years when the Arab Spring reached Tripoli in 2011 and the country turned against him. For months, he refused to accept that it was over. He gave rambling televised addresses from a compound in Tripoli, blamed the uprising on foreign agents and hallucinogenic drugs, and promised to fight to the last man. By October, rebel forces had surrounded his hometown of Sirte. Gaddafi and a small convoy of loyalists attempted to break out on October 20th. A NATO aircraft spotted the convoy and struck it from the air. He survived the strike and crawled into a concrete drainage culvert beneath a nearby highway overpass, where rebel fighters found him hiding among debris. According to witnesses, he asked them not to shoot. A mobile phone video captured what came next. Gaddafi was pulled into the street, beaten, and shot. He was 69. The official cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, though exactly who fired it and precisely when remains disputed. His body was then driven to Misrata and placed inside a commercial freezer, where it was displayed publicly for 4 days, while thousands of Libyans came to look at him. Nicolae Ceausescu had held power in Romania for 24 years when the revolution reached him in December 1989, and even at the very end, he did not fully understand what was happening. On December 21st, he stood on the balcony of the Central Committee building in Bucharest and addressed a crowd of over 100,000 people assembled below. He blamed the unrest on fascist agitators. He promised wage increases. About 8 minutes into the speech, the crowd started booing. Ceausescu raised his right hand and called for silence, visibly confused, and the noise briefly dropped. Then it came back louder. He retreated inside the building. Bucharest erupted. By the next morning, the uprising had spread to every major city in Romania. His defense minister took his own life, and the military switched sides and joined the revolution almost immediately. On December 22nd, Ceausescu and his wife Elena escaped by helicopter from the roof of the Central Committee building, the crowd reaching the top floor seconds after the aircraft lifted off. They were ordered to land by Army Command, detained at a military facility, and held while officers listened to revolution updates on a nearby radio. On Christmas Day, December 25th, 1989, a military tribunal tried and sentenced them both to death. The trial lasted roughly 2 hours. Ceausescu refused to recognize the court's authority and insisted he was still the legal president of Romania. It made no difference. They were taken outside and executed by firing squad. struck by more than 120 bullets combined. The footage was broadcast on Romanian television that same night. Francisco Franco's ending looked nothing like those. Franco had ruled Spain since 1939, and by the late 1960s, he was already managing his own transition from power, officially naming Prince Juan Carlos as his successor in 1969. By the autumn of 1975, Franco was 82, and his body was giving out across multiple systems simultaneously. He suffered a series of heart attacks, strokes, and acute internal bleeding episodes through October and November. His medical team kept him alive through repeated aggressive interventions, at one point connecting him to several machines simultaneously, while performing multiple major surgeries within the span of a few weeks. Some accounts suggest members of his inner circle quietly began debating whether further intervention was morally defensible. He died on November 20th, 1975, a date that carried almost deliberate symbolic weight. It fell on the 39th anniversary of the execution of José Antonio Primo de Rivera, founder of Spain's fascist Falange movement, who had also died on November 20th. Some reports later suggested Franco may have actually died the evening before, with the official announcement held back by several hours. Juan Carlos was proclaimed king 2 days later and began dismantling the regime within months. In 2019, more than 4 decades after his death, Spain's government ordered his exhumation from the Valley of the Fallen, ruling that only Civil War victims should be buried there. His family contested the decision. The government proceeded. His grandson draped the coffin in a nationalist flag at the reburial, because the use of the official Spanish flag was legally prohibited. Saddam Hussein spent 9 months in hiding after the United States-led coalition invaded Iraq and collapsed his government in April 2003. When Baghdad fell, he was nowhere near the city. The U.S. military issued playing cards printed with the faces of the most wanted regime figures. Saddam was the ace of spades. A $25 million bounty was placed on his head. His sons, Uday and Qusay, were killed in a firefight with U.S. forces in Mosul that July, eliminating his closest protectors and significantly narrowing the circle he could trust. He moved constantly through small safe houses, relying on a shrinking group of tribal loyalists from his home region near Tikrit. In December 2003, a soldier near the town of Ad-Dor noticed a rope partially buried in the ground beside a mud brick farm hut. Pulling it revealed a styrofoam-covered trapdoor. Below it was a hole roughly 6 feet deep and barely wide enough to turn around in. Saddam Hussein was inside, armed with a pistol and $750,000 in cash, and he surrendered without firing a shot. He reportedly told the soldiers, "My name is Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq, and I want to negotiate." He was tried by an Iraqi tribunal, found guilty of crimes against humanity in November 2006, and hanged on December 30th. A secretly recorded mobile phone video of the execution leaked online within hours. Witnesses taunted him as the noose was placed around his neck. Pol Pot. By 1997, the Khmer Rouge that Pol Pot had commanded for decades was disintegrating from the inside. In June of that year, he ordered the assassination of his longtime comrade Sun Sen, along with 13 members of Sen's family and household staff. He later claimed he had not authorized all of those killings. Nobody inside the movement believed him. One of his top military commanders, Ta Mok, concluded he was likely next and moved first. Ta Mok rallied his forces, accused Pol Pot of betrayal, and drove him from his stronghold. By that point, Pol Pot was so physically deteriorated, he had to be carried. He was caught and placed under house arrest in the jungle near the Thai border. While confined there, he gave his final interview to American journalist Nate Thayer in October 1997. He claimed his conscience was clear. He insisted he had acted for his country, not for power. When Thayer raised the deaths of nearly 2 million Cambodians, Pol Pot said the number was too high. Khmer Rouge leaders had formally sentenced him to life imprisonment at a jungle tribunal that July. On April 15th, 1998, he was found dead in his sleep. The official cause was listed as heart failure. Thayer, who had been scheduled to escort him to face an international court the following morning, later reported that those present believed Pol Pot had taken a deliberate combination of medication after learning he was about to be handed over. His body was cremated within days on a pyre of old rubber tires and household garbage. No international court ever tried him. Kim Jong-il spent his final years being photographed. North Korean state media produced a steady stream of staged images showing him visiting factories, reviewing military units, and inspecting agricultural cooperatives, and intelligence analysts in South Korea, Japan, and the United States studied those images carefully, examining shifts in his physical appearance, checking dates on any visible newspapers, analyzing the angles of shadows to verify when photographs were actually taken. In September 2008, Kim missed the military parade marking the 60th anniversary of the North Korean state, one of the most symbolically significant events in the country's calendar. U.S. intelligence assessed he had likely suffered a stroke. North Korea said nothing, but quietly instructed its foreign diplomats to remain close to their embassies in case an important announcement came. Over the following years, Kim reappeared in public and began appearing alongside his youngest son, Kim Jong-un, in ways that clearly signaled succession planning. Then, on December 17, 2011, state media announced that Kim Jong-il had died of a heart attack aboard his personal train. The announcement came with extraordinary accompanying claims. A fierce snowstorm had reportedly paused at the moment of his death. The sky above the sacred Mount Paektu glowed red, and ice on a nearby lake cracked with a sound that, according to state media, shook heaven and earth. His son assumed full control within days. North Korean citizens who failed to weep publicly during the mandatory 10-day mourning period were reportedly subject to punishment. Stalin's final months were defined by a paranoia so complete it had effectively cut him off from the doctors whose job it was to keep him alive. In January 1952, he had one of his personal physicians imprisoned after the doctor suggested he retire to protect his health. He then launched the doctor's plot, a fabricated conspiracy accusing a group of mostly Jewish physicians of planning to assassinate senior Soviet leaders. Those who were not arrested were too frightened to offer honest medical advice. On the night of March 1st, 1953, his staff found him lying semi-conscious on the floor of his bedroom at his dacha outside Moscow. Protocol required explicit permission before anyone could enter his private rooms, and nobody wanted to be the person to give that permission. Several hours passed before anyone acted. He was moved onto a couch and remained there for 3 days, hand-fed with a spoon, given various medicines and injections as his condition steadily worsened. He died on March 5th. An autopsy confirmed a cerebral hemorrhage compounded by severe arterial damage. When his body was put on public display in Moscow, the crowds were so enormous and so poorly managed that hundreds of people were killed in a crush on the surrounding streets. Lavrentiy Beria, head of the Soviet secret police and the man standing to gain most immediately from Stalin's death, was later alleged by multiple historians and Soviet insiders to have either delayed or actively prevented timely medical intervention. Nothing was ever formally proven. Mao Zedong spent his final years being kept alive as a carefully managed state secret. He was a lifelong heavy smoker, and by the mid-1970s, his body was failing across multiple systems simultaneously. His doctors believed he may have been developing Parkinson's disease and possibly ALS, though neither diagnosis was ever publicly confirmed. In 1976, the deterioration accelerated. Mao suffered a serious heart attack in March, another in late June, and a third on September 2nd that left him completely incapacitated. He died 7 days later on September 9th, 1976, at the age of 82. He had asked to be cremated. That request was ignored. His body was embalmed and placed on permanent display in a purpose-built mausoleum in Tiananmen Square in Beijing, where it remains today. Over 1 million people filed past in the weeks after his death. Within a month, his closest political allies, including his widow Jiang Qing, were arrested by the incoming leadership. Jiang Qing was sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. The government never publicly acknowledged that Mao had asked not to be preserved. By April 20th, 1945, the day of Adolf Hitler's 56th birthday, the Soviet Red Army was closing in on Berlin from the east and the Western Allies from the west. He came above ground for the last time that afternoon, stepping into the Reich Chancellery Garden to present medals to a group of teenage soldiers from the Hitler Youth. It was the last daylight he saw. By April 23rd, Berlin was fully encircled. Reports from the front were catastrophic. His senior commanders were either disobeying orders, fleeing, or secretly attempting to negotiate surrender with the Allies behind his back. He had both Himmler and Göring declared traitors and stripped of their commands. On the night of April 28th, he married Eva Braun in a brief civil ceremony inside the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. The following day, word arrived that Mussolini had been captured by partisans, executed, and hung upside down in Milan. Hitler stated he would not allow the same to happen to him. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops reportedly less than 500 meters from the bunker entrance, Hitler shot himself. Eva Braun swallowed a cyanide capsule at the same moment. Their bodies were carried to the Reich Chancellery Garden above, soaked in gasoline, and set on fire while Soviet artillery rounds exploded around them. It was not until 1956 that a West German court officially declared him dead. His dental remains are the only physical evidence ever positively identified. There are names that did not make this list, not because their endings were less extreme, but because the list had to stop somewhere. Jean Bedel Bokassa, the self-declared emperor of the Central African Republic, was tried for cannibalism, sentenced to death, had that sentence commuted twice, was eventually released from prison, and died peacefully at home at 75. Sapar Murat Niyazov of Turkmenistan renamed the months of the year after himself and members of his family, built a solid gold rotating statue of himself engineered to always face the sun, and died of cardiac arrest in 2006 while still in power. Enver Hoxha ruled Albania for 40 years, ordered the construction of over 170,000 concrete bunkers across the country, roughly one for every 4 citizens, and died in 1985, leaving behind a population so isolated from the outside world that adjusting to life outside his system took years. Each of those is its own story, and each of them ends strangely. If you want part 2, say so in the comments, and subscribe so you actually see it when it comes out.